Thank you for listening to The Path to Authenticity. My name's Tom Gentry. I think of this show as the opposite of small talk. You'll hear real conversations with real people who know who they are. We talk about what makes them who they are, how they became who they are, and how we might become truer expressions of who we are.
I'm Jamie Engel, and this is The Path to Authenticity.
If this is your first time here, thanks for checking it out. If not, thanks for coming back. I'm Tom Gentry, and this is The Path to Authenticity. Episode 160 for February 1st, 2022, featuring a conversation with Jamie Engel. Jamie Engel is the program director, founder of Circle City Recovery, and I joined that team about 3 weeks ago now. Spent most of the last 2 weeks in Indiana, spending time with the staff there, getting to know them, and I'm very excited about the work that we're going to do together. So this is sort of a transitional period for the podcast. I have a new sponsor that we'll begin to partner with next week. So I figured this would be a good time to share this episode. I also have another couple podcasts in the works. This new sponsor I got, originally, I was talking to them about sponsoring the 20 Questions podcast, which I had initially intended to release in January of 2022. And as we continued to talk about that, they liked the idea, but were more interested in sponsoring this, so we worked it out. That leaves me without a sponsor for the 20 Questions show. And I've just kind of decided I'm going to wait until I have a sponsor before releasing that. I have another podcast coming out probably in May called Men Who Talk. I'm going to be doing that with my friend Ed Tilton, who is the director of operations at the Begin Again Institute. That's going to start out as a series of live rooms on Clubhouse, all discussions around men and intimacy. Probably going to include some other guests, but it's going to be really cool. I'm excited about it. So lots of good stuff happening. And it was a lot of fun doing this episode with Jamie, so I hope you enjoy it. Here you go. Jamie Engel. A little change of pace compared to the interviews I usually do. And since we set this appointment, I've kind of been thinking about, what am I going to say? How do I tee this one up? So if you've listened, I lost my mom pretty recently. And I started thinking while I was home for her funeral that at the very least, I needed to be spending more time there and just had this intuition that I need to, why am I not here, And all that really came from that was a phone call. And I made a phone call to one of the owners of this facility, so Circle City Sober Living, because if I was to move, I do an in-person group once a week down here, and I wanted to be able to replace that. Pretty much everything else I do in terms of bringing in income, I do virtually, by phone or virtually. And so, yeah, that's really the only clear objective I had. I knew it was a really good place, but didn't know much more than that. Jamie and I had shaken hands once, but never really had a conversation. And then a month later, here we are. I just announced the day before yesterday, like on Facebook and LinkedIn, that I accepted this position on the team there. And so I thought this would be a great time just to have Jamie come and talk about who he is, what he does, how he ended up opening this place, and how all this came together. So I appreciate you being here, man. And I'm looking forward to seeing you in person tomorrow and seeing the place for the first time tomorrow. And some of the people here listening can tell you for sure how excited I am, because I've been talking to them and they've heard it in my voice. And I really am. I'm just so excited to do this with you and the other guys. And so tell us who you are, where you're from, all that stuff.
Absolutely. Well, first and foremost, the feeling is mutual. I mean, this really kind of popped out of the woodwork for me. I got a call from Lee, who is our mutual friend and one of my co-owners. And, the way it was presented to me was, there's this guy, Tom, and I think you know him, and you guys share so much of the same passion. I really think you need to connect. And when Lee says something like that, it's kind of just, I know it's off to the races. So I just really am excited as well. So a little bit about me. I grew up in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm adopted. I'm 41. I started my own personal journey through recovery. And when I say recovery, I mean through recovery from kind of my life and life events. About the time I was 24, I had dabbled with getting guidance and support earlier on than that. But I never really put a solid effort into it. I got sober. I went to treatment. I started looking at a number of reasons why I was actively using, and a lot of it stemmed from a place of abandonment and a lack of self-worth. And I struggled with trying to figure out who I was, what my identity was, what my purpose was to be. And, a lot of those answers didn't come till much later, but the journey in finding who I was supposed to be definitely started then. Opening up the past, opening up a lot of the boxes of who brought me to where I was, or I guess what brought me to where I was, started in treatment. I had a therapist, maybe the first therapist that I really truly felt connected with, that shifted a conversation in my head from, I'm this adopted kid that was worth giving up on because it was the first thing that happened to me, to a really simple thought of, have you ever stopped to think that the next thing that happened to you was two people who wanted you more than anything in the world chose you to be a part of their family? And I never even bothered to look through that type of lens. And I think what it did was it cracked open a door for me to see that, maybe the narrative that I'd been writing had been wrong the whole time. Or even that if it had been right, I had missed, a large section of the story that I was just refusing to look at. From there, I started working in the field a couple of years after that. I was part of a pretty big company that had started called Addiction Intervention Resources, and they they wanted to be known and started themselves off as being known as the place to go if you needed support on the front end of treatment. And starting in the call center there, I was taking a lot of crisis phone calls of people who said, my husband, wife, sister, brother, son, daughter, whomever is struggling and we need help. And that was kind of the first place that I learned that the majority of my job to be started with a simple question of why don't you tell me a little bit about what's been going on, and then learning to listen and hold space. And that 26-year-old kid wouldn't have known that it was holding space and wouldn't necessarily have known that it was a powerful way to engage with people at the time. It was just something that I was told, this is what you should do, so do it. And being in early recovery, I was very much of that mindset of everybody else knows more than me, and I should listen to them and take their suggestions. And so that's what I did. And, I credit a number of people at that company for kind of shaping me into who I am. One in particular is, is a friend of mine, Jim Geckler, who I've stayed close with through all the years, but, he helped shape that approach in how I reached out to people. He also opened up another door to look at who I was that, like I said before, he cracked the door open for me, but I wasn't really willing to swing it open until years later, which, I've always been known as this very energetic, very passionate person, which I don't deny, but a lot of that also stems from a really, really strong mental health diagnosis of anxiety that I never received. I was misdiagnosed for a long time, and I didn't know how to handle my anxiety because nobody had put their finger on it the right way. And he was kind of one of the first people to see it and help give me pointers on how to slow myself down, how to take a breath, how to essentially pace out life, speed it up. I had left that company and felt pretty burned out on the field. The company was really driven, and it took a lot out of me to be present and be an active part of what was going on there. And kind of the longer that I stayed and the more burnout I got, I didn't vocalize it. I was unaware of what self-care looked like. And, it got the best of me. And, I was asked to leave, and rightfully so. I was not in the place to be able to continue doing the work that I was doing there. But I had left after learning a few more skills, like how to facilitate, a family consultation on helping people find, therapeutic treatment options. I'd done a number of transports at that point for people who were trying to get to treatment and needed support in order to get there. I had sat second seat at a number of interventions at that point, and had started essentially apprenticing in what an intervention looked like. And, a couple of years later, I stepped into another company called FBHC Advisors, with all of those skills and a little more time under my belt and a little more therapy and therapeutic guidance on who I was and what shaped me. And it gave me an opportunity to step back into the field with some of those skills that I had been given, but tinkered with and used the right way. And I fell in love all over again with doing the work, doing interventions, taking people to treatment, finding clinically appropriate treatment for them. And along the way, we had another good friend in the field who runs a program outside of Nashville and Cumberland Furnace, and does a lot of work with music cares and the music scene in Nashville. And because of some of my life experience working with a dear friend in my life who has a lot of celebrity status, and working with their family, the owner of that program and my boss at the time approached me and said, "Hey, we have this musician and we think it would be really, really great if you could step into the role of a sober companion and be support for him on the road as he tries to reassemble his life after treatment." And, that's where I learned to double down on what boundaries meant and really help figure out how to explain what I was doing in that role, which was, not stepping into the role of being a babysitter, but rather, somebody who is willing and wanting to grow and learn, to create solutions for success and building, structured support in a really unstructured environment. I'll even go a step further and to say an environment that really screams for everything other than what we try to do in recovery. And for about 8 years, I was living on a plane, newly married, traveling around the world, working with people who either traveled professionally, were in the music business. I worked with a number of families and executives who were leaving treatment and doing return to home services and helping them reintegrate and build continuing care recovery in the community that they were stepping back into. And I guess somewhere deep down, that's always been for me where the rubber met the road when it came to recovery. And through that process, I learned about a lot of different treatment centers and a lot more treatment options and a lot of different levels of care. I started to deepen my relationship with individual therapists in different modalities and got this incredible opportunity to learn and often sit in with my clients during sessions and see how the work took place and see the types of changes that they made, and just, I think, deepen my love for, what we get to do on a day-to-day basis. And we got to a place where my wife and I missed each other and wanted to have a family and wanted to grow ourselves. And I really felt like I wasn't able to do that when I was living on a plane and constantly away. And we had this idea that where we lived, I backtrack 2 steps. We moved from Minneapolis to Indianapolis in 2010, and we were looking around at the landscape, and I saw a number of good options of support for people, but nothing that wowed me, nothing that impressed me, nothing that stopped me to say, "Oh my gosh, like this is something I want to be a part of." And I think my wife's name's Meredith, and I think she was probably the one who posed the question to me of, well, if you don't see it, why don't you create it? And when that seed got planted, I think I grew it in my mind for quite a while before I let any light in on it, before I started talking to other people in the industry about it, before I started considering it a reality or even an option, I guess. But come time to step off the road, I went to some of the people that I know really well and I'm very close with in the field, and started talking to them about this idea that I had. And one of them was my business partner Lee, and the other was my business partner, Mike, and they both sat and attentively listened and thought, well, we have something like that we do in Boston. We should support Jamie in this process. And, I think I told Tom the story, but I talked to Mike first and Josh, the guy who runs the program in Boston. And after that, I went out to dinner with Lee that same day. And while I was at dinner with Lee, they ended up calling him and they said, we need to do this. We need to support him. We need to figure out how to make it happen. And within a few hours, we had all agreed that was something that we were going to try to push forward with. And a couple months later, we found a house and started building the physical structure while I journeyed around looking for the people that I wanted to kind of shape and mold into who would be running the program with me. And that was, it started in 2016. By 2017, we got the property. By 2018, we had our staff. And in July of 2018, we opened and took our first resident. And it's been a fun and challenging, but uphill battle to convince this kind of region of the country the value of structured, sober living support that encourages not just, recovery in the 12-step community and looking at sobriety, but doing work on your past trauma and engaging in therapy and building community and learning the definition of accountability and what it means to grow into these things and be the man or the men that we want to be. And it's been this overwhelming blessing in my life. And shortly after the house opened, I guess it was a year almost to the day after the house opened, we had our first child. I have a son, and I mean, nothing has made me want to continue this journey and succeed as best I can more than he does. I think. I know I was a little bit all over the boards, but I think that's kind of the structure of who I am and where I got to today. And, I want to continue the conversation and, hopefully fill in the gaps. Tom, I'm going to hand it back to you and
back to me.
You can guide us, buddy.
One of the things that comes to mind for me a lot, actually, but definitely in this conversation is the sort of haves and have-nots nature of addiction treatment.
Mm-hmm.
And by extension, the entire medical field in the United States, the healthcare industry. Quality care basically is available to people who have money.
Yeah.
And the less money you have, the less is available for you.
Yeah.
And just listening to you describe your career, you got to do with people with means what we all deserve to have as people in recovery.
Absolutely.
But not everyone gets it. And, one of the reasons why I fit well into this picture is because I've helped launch a program that sort of came about the same way, the only place like that in the market. Everybody kind of scoffed at it. That's way too expensive. They don't need all that and blah, blah, blah. But I've been a counselor for a long time. I've had coaching training, but I never really did any recovery coaching until about 3 years ago. And until I didn't get it. And I spent a weekend with a guy from an extraordinarily wealthy family who had just relapsed. He was almost out of treatment, but heading back into treatment. And I stayed with him for a weekend. And, like you mentioned, holding space. I mean, I just did that for a weekend and just talked to him and was available to him. And it hit me then, like, this is what this is about. This is what we really need. We need somebody to be with us and to love us back to health and to be there in the moments when we are challenged with life in early recovery. And the program you're talking about is a lot more like that than what we think of as like a halfway house or a sober house.
Yeah.
Most of these places, clean bed, hopefully, drug testing, here's a meeting list, you're on your own. That's what most of them are. And what this is a lot more than that. It's a place where people aren't going to fall through the cracks. There's going to be adequate staff to watch over them and to be there for them and spend time with them. And it's really a nice home, like the way it should be, right?
Yeah.
But unfortunately, that costs a lot of money to do. So not everybody has access to it, which is sad, but it's just kind of the way that it is. But what also comes from it is that when you create an atmosphere like that, a community builds around it, which also ends up affecting the other places. And when you have the best place and there are half dozen other places around you that aren't that great, sooner or later, they got to start stepping up their game, right? I mean,
absolutely.
And that's what happens. And that's what, I see happening with this. And I'm sure it's already happened to some degree, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So what's it been like being there in that community these last few years?
It's been, I think, equally adventurous and challenging in the best way that I can describe it. I've watched a couple of the other programs change hands. I've watched some new residential inpatient treatment open up. I've seen some really great people step into the space here. And I think as we're all so keenly aware, this pandemic we've been living in the middle of has made a lot of this journey difficult, and a lot of fly-by-night decisions have had to be made. So watching people that I guess have the same passion and about the industry, about the field that we work in, and want to provide that same quality care and hold that space have started venturing into this area, this central, also southern Indiana area. And it's been really nice to see. I've been reached out to a number of times, by colleagues that I really respect, saying, "Hey, we're coming to your area. We want to, we've been asked to help grow quality care where you are." And that's been fantastic. In my local 12-step community that I'm actively a part of, I'll tell a little story. I was really ego driven when I got here, in the sense of where I came from. Getting sober in Minneapolis, St. Paul is, for people in the recovery community, kind of look at it as this mecca of sorts of sober community. And when I stepped away from it, I think I probably was holding too tightly on to an idea of I'll never find something like this again, rather than I can help create my experience wherever I go and share it with others. And it took me a little bit to get over that, to get over that egotistical hurdle that I put in my way. But when I did, I found, there's a bolstering community of recovery, of people who absolutely love and care and appreciate all of the things that I'm trying to do. And, when I stepped out of my own way and started opening my ears and listening when I was telling people about what I was trying to do, hands and heads popped up all over, and slowly but surely, there's been a shift, and I don't credit myself for it. I would hope that, I could take some responsibility and say I was part of that shifting change. But I've definitely seen it in some of the programs that are here. One other sober house in particular, I know, has had a change in ownership, and, there's somebody that I am close with that is kind of helping guide them into what they're trying to do. But more than anything, the dialogue is changing. And I said it earlier, we constantly have this conversation of cost versus value. And you and I have this conversation of cost versus value, and getting people to recognize that, value is important, and it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody's going to be able to afford it. But the more that we bring it into the community, the more the community can take it on themselves and start spreading it. I was talking to my staff the other day, and, currently our census is pretty low. And we talked about how the program itself was almost self-perpetuating when, we had a full house full of guys and the pandemic wasn't going on, and we were out and about in the community, because I think that what we try to do is represented in who the guys show up as in the community, and it's more than just me. It's my staff, it's the residents, it's who we are as a house when we attend a meeting or go participate in fellowship or engage in some fun rec event, and people say, "Oh, those are the guys from Circle City. Look at who they are. Look at what they're doing. Look how much fun they're having. Look at the way they show up in the community." And it encourages others to want to be a part of it and want to grow it and pay it forward in their own ways. And watching that change happen has been incredible. And with the pandemic and things going in and out of lockdown, temporary lockdown, meetings starting and stopping, and activities not being able to be engaged in, that's been challenging. I think that it feels like it's stifled our momentum on what we're trying to do. But I think everybody on my team is, of the mindset that, if we get knocked down, we will get back up again. And, we're going to keep charging forward. I had dinner with my staff director last night, and, he said to me, he said, "I feel like we're on the verge of something big." And I said, "I felt like I've been on the verge of something big since, I opened the doors." He said, "Yeah, but this feels different. This feels better, and it feels more sustainable in the long run." And, that was on the tails of the conversation that we had about you coming on board and you getting to bring to the table what we kind of all have said that has been lacking, which is, another voice to project our hearts outward.
I love that. Yeah. And, listening to you, I was thinking about, I recognized your face, I think, the first time I saw you.
Mm-hmm.
But it was at the Breakers, probably the last time there was a real conference there. And I was with Hugh Nash, our mutual friend and colleague. And it went something like me saying, "Who's that?" And he says, "Oh, that's Jamie Engel with Circle City Sober Living." And I heard what? Circle City Sober Living? And if you're from Indiana, Indianapolis is the Circle City. And it hit me that way because I grew up an hour away from there and left 25 years ago, left my family to go get good treatment and stayed away to go to a decent transitional living facility because there was nothing there. And I've been luring people out of that state for 25 years. And to learn that there was a facility with the caliber of people involved, it just, it made me happy and also made me want to help immediately, and I remember walking up and introducing myself to you, and, we really didn't have much of a conversation, but it stayed in my mind, Yeah. And I didn't forget it because there is such a vast difference between a place and a good place. And I knew just because of the people involved that this was a good place, because they wouldn't be associated with it if it wasn't a good place, and it was potentially a great place. I just wasn't sure yet. So, then eventually a few years later, making that phone call to Lee, and here we are. It's just, it amazes me that this has happened the way that it has, and just the specificity of the experience that I have had in my career and how it applies to this situation. You couldn't have written this script, right?
Absolutely. No, it was overwhelming in the best way.
Yeah. So, well, I'm just excited, this level of care, like you said at the beginning, it's the same expression that I've always used. It's where the rubber hits the road, because anybody can go to treatment, whether it's, mediocre or not good treatment or great treatment. But no matter what, if you don't implement those tools in your daily life, it will not work. And the whole trick is learning how to live again.
Yeah.
And so to be able to create a healthy atmosphere where men can live and learn how to live again and be loved and supported, and to watch them go from my life's over to, wow, I'm happy and I couldn't imagine being happy. And there's one guy who comes to mind that you and I have talked about, the facility that he now owns, which is world class.
Mm-hmm.
He was one of those guys. And now it's a place, it's one of the best places in the world.
Yeah.
That he went and created. Imagine that. Just the ripple effects of what we do. It's so important. Even just what we say to people and how we say it, and it reminds me of the saying that we hear in the 12-step community. You may have heard it. I don't know. Sure, maybe it's regional, but you may be the only big book some people ever read.
Yeah.
Just the power of example and modeling behavior for people. And just, if nothing else, these guys who have worked for you, to get to see you go for it like this and see that that's what recovery is really about, you know, living the fullest expression of our lives and being of service. It's awesome. It's awesome. Well, man, I don't know what else to say. I mean, anything else you want to talk about? Like, I'm just excited and happy and grateful. And I figured, you know, I have this podcast. Why not take the opportunity to let everybody know about this? And
I very much appreciate it. It's been a joy every time the phone rings and I see your name pop up. It's so funny. You know, I think back to the type of person I was before I stepped into recovery, before I started doing any work on myself and my anxiety. And I laugh because I used to be the guy that my phone would ring. It doesn't matter whose name popped up. I would immediately, you know, hit silent and, you know, want to throw my phone to the other side of the room. And I think it speaks to the journey that you and I are on, that every time it rings now and I see your name, I'm instantly invigorated and I'm excited to talk about, you know, what's the next step? What are we going to do next? What is it going to look like when you get here this weekend? What are we going to do next week? And how are we going to talk to people about what we're doing here and really just share the spirit and love of what we're trying to do. And I think that was one of the things that drew me into our first conversation is, you know, I very much go off of my gut reactions that I have to people. You know, my gut tends to be really good at filtering out, you know, positive influences in my life from negative ones.
Which is a very useful tool to have in our industry, I might add.
Oh yeah.
Like we need it. Yeah,
absolutely. You know, whether it be with the people that we work with, you know, on a professional level in conferences, which I genuinely was sitting, listening to the story about when we first shook hands, and all I kept thinking to myself was, oh, Tom, if you knew how bad my anxiety was at conferences, I am not surprised that I didn't shake your hand and like full speed run the other way, just because I go there for those encounters. And as soon as they happen, I get completely overwhelmed, terrified, and need to like find some space to breathe.
Wow. Well, that's good to know. That's good to know.
Yeah. But from those, you know, I also love it though, because you catch somebody in the right moment in that environment, and with all the chaos going on externally, like being able to lock in to the person that you're talking with can be so gratifying and mean so much. And, you know, I mean, some of the closest colleagues and friends that I've made in this field have been in those strange environments that we call conferences. But, you know, it extends beyond that. It extends to the guys that I get to work with in the house, you know, and really, you know, I keep going back to the word connection. In community, it's so vital. You know, when I first hired my staff, you know, they're like, you know, I was doing all case management. I wouldn't let them touch a case management because they, you know, didn't know what they were doing, but I would have them sit in and listen and participate. You know, for almost the first year, they sat there and they're like, so what do we do? I say, you be present, you hold space, you sit with the guys, you talk to them about life, about where they're at, about where they've been and where they're trying to go. And, you know, my favorite metaphor that I use is, it works really well off of how we talk about recovery, right? We talk about going to treatment and learning the tools that we need to live life again. And I said, well, you leave treatment and you got to learn to to build a house to live in. And the problem with that is that you can walk out of the door with treatment with a bag full of tools, and you've never met another person that's built a house before. You're going to look at those bags of tools and be completely frozen in fear. And it's so much more helpful when you run into somebody else who says, hey, I've done this before. Let me show you how I do it. You know, you have some amazing tools in that bag. Let me show you how to use them. And to further the analogy and conversation, you know, I get to also talk to them about why it's important to, you know, go to their psychiatrist and get their medication straight and talk in therapy and go to meetings and, you know, participate in house events, because each of the tools individually are fantastic, but you can't build a house with just a hammer. You know, you need a multitude of tools in order to get it done. And you're going to need somebody who's worked with each and every one of them in order to build a lasting structure that's going to support you for as long as you choose to remain in recovery and moving forward. And you know, I do believe it's a choice. I believe that, you know, we get sober, we do the work on our trauma, we do the work on our childhood, we look at our mental health, and we get the opportunity to make the choice on whether or not we want to keep moving forward. I know with, you know, substance use, particularly when I was in active addiction, I didn't have a choice. The choice was not mine. It was, this is the only thing that I can do to survive. I'm not even going to say function, because it was survive. You know, it was not a choice. Yet I get into recovery and I'm given the choice. I have the choice every day, and I get the opportunity to choose a better path. And I tell my guys, I want to have that choice. I want that option for as long as I can have it. So I'm going to keep doing the work so the option stays mine. And the guys that hear it and feel it and take it and run, I mean, the dividends that pays are more than, you know, anything I could ever have hoped for.
Yeah, it's all that matters, right?
Yeah.
So funny. I was just thinking, man, I didn't know. Does he have a dog at the house? And then it's my dog barking in the background.
It's a miracle. I do have a dog at the house. I have a little beagle. He's 6, and he is a loudmouth. So the fact that he hasn't made a peep yet is, I'm utterly shocked right now.
You know, it's been a little overwhelming to me how good this has felt, you and I, you know, because I had the same experience from the first conversation. It just felt good. And for me, I guess I've gotten a little bit jaded with stuff like this over the last 8 years, I would say, because I've had a lot of opportunities where people were willing to hire me to make a meaningful contribution, which I could definitely make. And then, at least to some degree, go on to not listen to anything I say.
Yeah.
And that's really so frustrating, especially in this kind of setting, because, you know, I love doing groups. I'm good at doing groups. And you and I have talked about this. When you do a group at a place, I mean, you know what's going on.
Yeah.
Like you see everything. Yep. If you're paying attention, you can tell, is this a good place? Is it well staffed? Are they, you know, how well is the staff doing? All that kind of stuff. If you know the environment, you can pick up on things pretty easily. And to do that for years and years and then just not be able to do anything with that. After having an experience where I could, and it worked great, that was, man, it got old, and then talking to you guys and, it's like, okay, I could do a group. And in my mind, I thought I could do a lot more, but I don't know if they'll know I can do a lot more. And I don't know if they would even want me to, even though I could. And like, even with this, I made suggestions to you yesterday about what to do with your Clubhouse profile, and you just did it,
Yeah.
It's like there's a mutual trust, it feels like.
I would agree with that. And I think that for me has been, I think one of the biggest blessings I've received in my life is that, I talked a lot about, the work that I got to do in consulting, and I'll tell you, and I'm sure you're familiar, it can be a really lonely place because you very much do a lot of it on your own without a team of people around you, even if you're working on a team, because every place that I've done consulting, I've been part of a team, and it's isolated by nature, and it feels counterintuitive. And, you spoke to it brilliantly, like the connection that you get to build with somebody, the person that you're working with is incredible. And when they buy in and they know and they understand, the work that you're trying to do together, it becomes something miraculous. It's not always like that. And that can be, for me, super frustrating. And so much of the work that I like to do, the best parts of it have been with others as a team. I think it allows us all the opportunities to bring out the best in one another. And I said to Lee, I've been, since the day I started this program, I've been hoping and praying for somebody like-minded to step into the space with me, because I love to collaborate. I love to work with people. I love to hear their ideas and try to implement them and give them my ideas and watch them try to implement them. And we get to see what works and what doesn't. And we get to say, well, that was a good try. And it totally, pardon my French, but we shat the bed on that one, and that's okay, because we're doing it together, and we're trying to step outside of the box of what we've been told year after year is how things have to be done. And I function creatively fairly well by myself. I function creatively in a group so much better. And I just like instantly saw us coming together during that first conversation, and it lit me up inside. The fire got kindled, and when I get down or depressed or afraid in my own life, in business, whatever, my MO, I've learned after years of therapy, is I tend to shut down. I close inwards. I'm very much an extrovert, and I function well with people. And when things don't go well, I turn inwards and I become quiet, and it's hard for me to find motivation. And, when you're running a company that you started and you want to see succeed, like, you don't get to do that. And it's really challenging to try to make it through the difficult times, any difficult time that comes up, when, that's how I process. And so having somebody else to kind of reach my arm out to and say, help hold me up. I want to keep going, and I don't necessarily know how. Like, one, that's a terrifying thing to have to say out loud. 2, I know that when I say it out loud, good things are going to happen, even if it is difficult. And 3, like I said, I mean, that fire was instantly kindled in me, thinking that we can do that for one another. You know, and that's not to discredit all the guys on my team. They're fantastic. Like I said, I love them all dearly, but it feels different because I've kind of guided them into who they are. And it's different than having somebody else come in who's had their own experience that, you know, I can walk side by side with and say, what do you think about this? How do we grow this forward? And not have sometimes what feels like your own thoughts regurgitated back to you.
Yeah. Yeah. Echo chamber.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, we probably ought to stop the love fest at this point.
Sure.
But this has been great, man. I'm so excited. All right, there you go. Another episode in the books. Thanks for listening. You can learn more about the show and this episode's guest at thepathtooauthenticity.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Every little bit helps. I want to thank the band Punk Rock Opera, whose music you hear throughout the show. Their songs are used with permission from the artist and under a Creative Commons license. If you're so inclined, check out the Patreon community. As soon as I do these interviews, I upload them to Patreon, where the content is only available to patrons, and for just a couple bucks a month. I usually post audio content, their exclusive audio content, probably 8 times a month, if not more. And as these new episodes are released, as soon as they're done, they're available to patrons. So sometimes that might be 2 weeks before an episode is released, or even longer. Usually it's a few days. Anyway, if you want to support the show, that's a great way to do it. So thanks again for investing your time. It's a big deal to me. Thank you for supporting me and supporting the show. I hope you keep coming back.
That's our story.
Be nice.
I hope you enjoyed the punk rock opera. And we have one last piece of music for you. It goes like this.
Okay, go. take, you wanna break everything that you can't stand. You cannot break us, you cannot make us, we are the Gen X men. We're just the losers that lived up the street, living on these chords, simple beats. You wanna cheat, you wanna stop, you wanna tear us down. We are the bad plans, man, we got our roots stuck in the ground.
Musical generation, self-made bands. We cut our teeth with bloody hands. The rage has instilled in us. Can feed a crowd, give them a rush. Thank you. Good night.